who could jump to weight divisions. I think if we move on to Henry Armstrong, he was probably the greatest, the greatest guy in the world. In fact, arguably, in my opinion, one of the best fighters ever. Went from featherweight to welterweight, beat Barney Ross, jumped back down to lightweight, beat Lou Ambers, and then fought Cifrino Garcia for the middleweight title and drew them over 10 rounds.
And was holding these world titles at the same time.
Nowadays he would have spanned 7 or 8 weight divisions. He was an incredible fighter.
It always amazes me, you know, when we hear about some of our fighters who might fight every 2 or 3 months, always having too many fights. When you think that Henry Armstrong, in October 1939, in a 3-week period, fought 4 times for the world welterweight title. 2 of those world title fights, within 4 days of each other, won them all and stopped all his opponents. I mean, they didn't call him Homicide Hank for nothing.
I saw him fight Ernie Roderick from Liverpool at Haringey Arena. That was, what, 38?
38.
And I was a copy boy on the London Evening News at the time. At the back of the hall, my dad and uncle were working in the corners, by the way, although I think they were both in Roderick's corner on that occasion. And he was just phenomenal. He had so much energy all the time. Just kept going, and he had ability with it. And the headline in our paper that day was Henry Armstrong shows London fans something new. That was the big headline. And we hadn't seen one like him before. And Roderick, let me say, was a very good boxer and a decent puncher. And we couldn't win anything with him. He went 15 rounds.
Yeah. And he was also the Evander Holyfield of his day. Because besides that, I mean, he became a minister of religion.
Yeah, genuine one too.
Oh yes, I mean he ended up as a minister.
As well as his spiritual motivations, Colin, was he also driven by a desire to prove in the history books and to have people like us half a century later debating it, that he could do things that no other man could do?
I don't think he worried about the history books. I think he was just hungry.
I think he was a winner. He just had a winner mentality.
And a great competitor. And as Barry said, to think that a featherweight went up to welterweight, then went back to lightweight and won 3 world titles at all those various weights. I mean, he must have been some man.
Jumped up to 10 stone. I remember watching the weights in the fight. He weighed 136 pounds when he fought Barney Ross for the welterweight title, which is exactly 9 stone 10. Barney Ross weighed 10 stone 4 for the title. And he beat him, he pulverised him over 50, and it went 15 rounds, and Ross showed immense bravery.
Was he a bigger star, Barry, at that time than Joe Louis, the heavyweight?
Joe Louis, he was before Joe Louis. Louis came along, and Louis he was a hero of Louis. Louis watched him and said, "This is the guy that I want to be like. This is you know, he was just perpetual motion, wear you down, grind you down, non-stop, and power." I remember watching a thing of him training, and they had this most unusual apparatus. They had this ball that was on a beam swinging at him, and he was bobbing and weaving. He had this attacking style where he fought in a crouch position, and he just was so powerful, and all his punches were hooks, and long hooks and short hooks, and just kept his head moving non-stop, staying on top of you. And I think that actually Louis developed his short punches like him in the sense that he was Louis was an incredible fighter. I mean, and his left hook was only travelled 12 inches, and he could just sever your head with a left hook.
He was very modest too in his retirement, you know, Henry Armstrong. You'd hardly believe that he was a fighter. You hardly ever mentioned it. Did I fight him? You know, did he beat me? No, of course not, Henry, you'd say to him. You had to remind him that he won all the time, you know.
If I may just throw in a statistic about Henry Armstrong, he won 150 fights, and 100 of them were by knockout. Yeah. That gives you an idea what sort of a man he was.
I'm talking about training. The guy hadn't got time to train. He fought in places as diverse as Los Angeles and in New York. And in those days, like, there were very few flights. They had to travel and fight within a couple of days.
Reg, Joe Louis is known as a very busy heavyweight champion of the world. To what extent are his achievements devalued by this bum of the month, the idea that they imported candidates?
There weren't the people around other than Nino Valdez, as we mentioned earlier, that he really ducked, I suppose, and it was just a question of keeping him going, and he could, if he fought Mickey Mouse, he'd have drawn people in at the time, Joe Louis. No, I wouldn't have devalued him on that at all. If they'd been there, he'd have beaten them. The Valdez thing, who knows, because then Valdez went and lost to somebody afterwards. It didn't matter to him.
That was Marciano, Valdez.
No, and Valdez wasn't around at the end of Louis' career. I thought he may well have been. No, he wasn't. You're quite right. It was Marciano, really.
But his talents for you, Louis?
Oh, great boxer. Great boxer. You know, I mean, he was every bit as good as Ali in the boxing sense, except that Ali had slightly the stronger chin and also fought better men, I think. Ali, always fought the
They
top guy.
always said, Reggie, that he lacked mobility, that he shuffled along the ground. I mean, his movement and his leg movements was, he would just shuffle forward. You could barely see him move as he came at you, but he would shuffle you. He always seemed to know where his opponent was. He would walk them on to punches.
Cut the ring
he
down,
would shuffle across the ring, cut a corner down, and walk you onto a left hook.
And a tremendous finisher.
Oh.
And once you got, I mean, arguably the most ferocious round in the heavyweight division was the second Schmeling fight. I think it was, remind me, 2 minutes 32 seconds.
Something like that. Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen anything as ferocious as Joe Louis was that night. But he wasn't going crazy. He was picking every shot.
Everything was controlled.
Yeah,
everything with sort of professional care he had about his punches.
He was like watching a pathologist really carve up the body, and that's what he did with his gloves.
I'm not brave enough to carve you up, except just to say we have to just take a pause here for just a moment. That's the end of round one, and when we come back, we'll be throwing it forward to the period of Archie Moore and Sugar Ray Robinson. Bye for now. We are engaged in a rather taxing debate here, speaking about boxing and trying to find out the identity of the finest pound for pound in any weight division. But we have some strong opinions. Colin Hart and Reg Guttridge joining myself and Barry McGuigan. And Barry, having spoken about the great fighters from the pre-Second World War era, well, we've got a man here next who spans those eras, both sides of the Second World War, but surely there's a misprint here somewhere. Surely Archie Moore cannot have been a professional between 1936 and 1963. That's
right. Yeah, and he won the title at... What age was he when he won the light heavyweight title?
He won it in 1952, so you work it out.
He would have been 40...
In his mid-40s, certainly.
Mid-40s.
Not when he won it.
He was an incredible fighter, and fought for the heavyweight title on a few occasions too. What a fighter. What a knockout. An incredible knockout record. 147 knockouts. The highest knockout record of all time. Still to be beaten to this day. Incredible puncher. And, you know, obviously didn't start boxing until he was at a fairly advanced age. What a fighter. I mean, I don't know how you guys think.
Holyfield Tyson fight.
Yeah. He's still working George Foreman's
and a little beard. He looked like a Chinaman.
Yeah. Is he still working Foreman's corner?
No, he's 84.
84?
84.
He looked 80.
I think his birthday was 1913.
Doesn't matter, it's about that, yeah.
1913, I think.
Lovely, I've got great regard for him as a boxer. The way he used to cover himself up all the time. And
the mongoose.
And then when he came out, he had a hard job doing the weight when he fought in London against Yolandi Pompey. And I was a newspaper guy then, and I had to go down Jermyn Street to this Turkish bath at lunchtime to wait for him to come out and get a quote. Because I knew he was going straight to the weigh-in from the Turkish bath, and I'm sort of standing out there. I said, excuse me, Archie, is the weight all right? He said, I've been there to do my weight. I come to have my pants pressed. He said, you know, there was no nerves and anything about it. I thought, and then he had a dull round with Yolandi Pompey holding his head. And Jack Hart, the referee, said, come on, get on with it, get on with it. And afterwards, then he stopped Pompey. And then afterwards, they said, what do you think about the referee? I thought he was very rude, he said. I mean, just wonderful character, but a real pro.
And I'll tell you what people, you know, they attack, understandably so, fighters who are fighting well into their 40s. People probably don't know this, people not non-boxing people, that he actually fought for the world heavyweight title at 42 years of age, and he put Marciano on the floor.
On the floor, yeah.
And he had his last fight 9 months before his 50th birthday. And he was very upset that the authorities at the time, his ambition was to have his last fight at 50, and they wouldn't let him, and he's upset about that to this day.
Well, just one thing before we move on. I remember I took a bit of information from his book and the summary of his career. When he was doing light heavyweight, he had such problems doing the weight that he used to have a steak, a big steak, and he would throw it over twice on the pan, and then he would chew it and chew the carcass and chew it, take the
Aborigines, he says.
He would take all the good out of it, and then he would spit out the carcass. He would take all the good out of the steak without actually eating the meat. And I used to do that myself.
He did it in the West End restaurant, Jack Irsow's, but he used to call Jack Irsow over, who was a bit of a character, and say, I don't think much of your damn meat, you better take that away. And he used to go crazy, Jack Irsow. He ddidn't realise he was only getting the nutriment out of it and couldn't afford to swallow it.
Yeah, he was the light heavyweight champion of the world for 11 years, never beaten. When he finished as light heavyweight champion of the world.
Do you take him seriously as a contender for the finest pound for pound of all time?
Oh, he must be a contender. I mean, he's not my choice, but he certainly would be up there as one of the contenders.
Ray